The Life and Times of Don Luis Bunuel.
In the village of Calanda, where I was born, the Middle Ages lasted until World War I. It was a closed and isolated society, with clear and unchanging distinctions among the classes. A respectful subordination of the peasants to the big landowners was deeply rooted in tradition and seemed unshakable. The major moments of life were marked by the daily bells of the Church of Pilar. They tolled for Masses, Vespers, and the Angelus. There was also a special deep, somber bell that tolled slowly when someone had begun his final combat, and a lighter, bronze bell that rang for a dying child. Progress, a word that no one seemed to have heard, passed Calanda by, just like the rain clouds. The dominating forces of my adolescence were my first encounters with death, a profound religious faith, and the awakening of sexuality. Religion permeated all aspects of our daily lives. I used to play at celebrating Mass in the attic of our house with my sisters as attendants. Our faith was so blind that, at least until the age of 14, we believed in the literal truth of the famous Calanda miracle. The story goes that Miguel Juan Pellicer, an inhabitant of Calanda, had his leg crushed under the wheel of a cart and it had to be amputated. Now, Pellicer was a very religious man who went to church every day to dip a finger into the oil that burned before the statue of the Virgin. Afterwards, he used to rub the oil on the stump of his leg. One night, it seems, that the Virgin and her angels descended from heaven, and when Pellicer awoke the next morning, he found himself with a brand new leg. It was a magnificent miracle. Next to it, the miracle of the Virgin of Lourdes seems to me rather paltry.
When we talk about Bunuel in France or in England, I suppose it's about the same, we always use the word surrealist, surrealistic. It belongs to a certain marginal way of making films. It's not a real classic. But in Spain, it's exactly the opposite. No one Spanish man would say about Bunuel that he is surrealistic. He's just Spanish. You know, what seems to us to be strange, cruel, rare, weird, is perfectly normal in Spain. It belongs to a real Spanish tradition.
He was brought up in the village of Calanda in Aragon, the village where on Easter Friday, the whole village, men, women, and children, old and young, go around the square beating drums so that Christ will rise from the dead until their hands are bleeding, their knuckles show, the white bone shows under the skin, the drums are tattered. It is almost a sacrifice so that God may rise again. This sense of sacrifice, death, life, resurrection was with him from the very start. It always is, I think, in the Catholic Mediterranean culture to which we belong.
The eldest of 7 children, Bunuel was his mother's favorite. For her, he was a saint. She used to keep his portrait on an improvised altar in the house, surrounded by photographs of the late popes. My children, she would say, are all descended from canons.
When I was 8, I entered the Jesuit Colegio del Salvador and remained there for 7 years. The Jesuits enforced an iron discipline. At the merest infraction, a student would instantly find himself on his knees behind his desk or in the middle of the classroom, arms outstretched under the stern eye of the proctor, who surveyed the entire room from a balcony. They never ceased to remind us that the highest virtue is chastity, without which no life is worthy of praise. St. Thomas Aquinas went so far as to affirm that the sexual act, even between husband and wife, is a venial sin, since it implied mental lust. Ironically, this implacable prohibition inspired a feeling of sin which for me was positively voluptuous. And although I'm not sure why, I've also always felt a secret and constant link between the sexual act and death. Is this because I found myself in my childhood and my youth the victim of the fiercest sexual oppression that history has ever known?
¿Quién eres?
Soy una niña inocente, Simón. Mira qué piernas tan inocentes. En mi reino, Simeón, ni son todos los que están, ni están todos los que son. Con un fachis barba, de Siria, deprica tu surina. Simón, mira mi lengua que larga.
No te temo, Satán. Cristo, Cristo, Cristo.
Volveré, greñudo, volveré.
¿Por qué escogió usted el cine para expresar su problemática, su visión del mundo? ¿Por qué el cine? ¿Por qué no la pintura? ¿Por qué no la literatura?
Por desgracia. Soy el peor pintor del mundo y el peor escritor del mundo. Si no fuera por eso, el cine ni hablar. No.
¿Pero por qué el cine? Algo debe haber atrás.
No, algo no. Es que tengo una facilidad. Yo, lo pobre o rico, me da igual. Lo que yo siento me puedo expresar en imágenes. Y no me puedo expresar escrito. Soy un ágrafo. Soy un hombre que Me dice usted que dice usted por la tarde y me cuesta 5 horas escribir en correcto castellano lo que dice, y tú lo escribes en 10 minutos, yo 5 horas. Soy muy mal escritor y pintor no hablemos, lo peor del mundo.
Y músico, pues.
Músico tal vez. No músico tal vez hubiera sido músico.
¿Y actor?
No, músico sí. No, ahora no, con el oído no. Beethoven, no.
Y actor, por ejemplo, y actor.
El peor del mundo. Actor es la profesión de vagos. Es una profesión de vagos. Esa sí me hubiera gustado.
Claro,
si volvieran a hacer profesión de vago, usted no hace nada. Usted llega al estudio, lo maquillan, molesto, pero en fin, me pagan bien, lo dejo. Luego me siento, llega el director, me dice, está un gran plano. Usted diga, no, por el momento no voy al baile. A ver, cámara, por el momento no voy al baile. Un gesto, demasiado gesto. Dígalo usted sin gestos, segunda toma. Por el momento no voy al baile. Demasiado actuado, tercera toma. Por el momento no voy al baile. Bien, es lo más fácil del mundo. Lo más fácil del mundo, ¿verdad? Y cobran muy bien y ahora yo si naciera actor de cine sí. Soy muy mal actor, pero me disciplinaría.
I had an easy childhood, idle and secure. My father was one of the richest men in Saragossa. And to be perfectly frank, he did absolutely nothing. His daily routine consisted of waking up, performing his morning ablutions, and reading the paper. Afterwards, he would check to see if his cigars had arrived from Havana and do some trivial errands. A pre-lunch aperitif rounded out the first half of the day. The only thing my father would carry in the street was his elegantly wrapped jar of caviar. According to social convention, men of rank were never supposed to carry anything. That's what servants were for. After lunch and a siesta, my father changed his clothes and went to his club. When I went to university in Madrid, I lived in the Residencia des Estudiantes, and without it, my life would have been very different. The most important aspect of my social life was the peña. A peña is a kind of meeting that takes place regularly in certain cafes. People meet according to their profession and always in the same place, from 3 to 5 in the afternoon or after 9 in the evening. A standard peña consists of anywhere from 8 to 15 regulars, all of whom are men. There were a number of important literary cafes in Madrid, like the Café Gijón, which miraculously is still there. Those of us who grew up at that time were profoundly influenced by the extraordinary writers Spain produced at the turn of the century. I was lucky enough to know most of them. Ortega y Gasset, Juan Ramón Jiménez, and Galdós, whose Nazarene and Tristana I later adapted for the screen. His writing is often as remarkable as Dostoevsky, but who, outside Spain, ever reads him? If Hemingway or Steinbeck had been born in Paraguay or Turkey, no one would ever have heard of them, which suggests alarmingly that the greatness of a writer is in direct proportion to the power of his country. Federico García Lorca arrived at the Residencia from Granada 2 years after I did. We liked each other instantly. Of all the human beings I have ever known, Federico was the finest. I don't mean his plays or his poetry, I mean him personally. He was his own masterpiece. He read beautifully and he had passion, youth and joy. When I first met him, I was an unpolished rustic interested primarily in sport. He transformed me, introduced me to a wholly different world. He was like a flame. Salvador Dali arrived at the Residencia a year later. Along with Federico, he became my closest friend. We were inseparable. When I was young, movies were little more than a curiosity, like the sideshow at a country fair. I'm sure my father never saw a movie in his life. The cinema was considered to be all right for the common folk, but scarcely an artistic enterprise. I remember my mother weeping with despair when in 1928 I announced my intention of making a film. It was as if I'd said, "Mother, I want to join the circus and be a clown."
Et le premier film que j'ai vu, c'était un film dessin animé, sonore et en couleur. C'était une espèce de cochon qui apparaît très rose, avec l'écharpe du commissaire de police qui chantait. Mais la couleur était faite à la main, sûrement photogramme par photogramme. Alors la couleur sortait des limites marquées par les corps, n'est-ce pas?
Et le son?
Le son, c'était un phonographe derrière l'écran.
Derrière, ah oui.
Derrière l'écran. Chose que j'ai fait après pour le Chien Andalou. C'était muet, j'ai mis un phonographe derrière l'écran, comme le premier film que j'avais vu dans ma vie.
Et quelle a été votre réaction? Vous vous en souvenez encore?
D'étonnement extraordinaire. Et les gros plans, les travelling, parce que je crois qu'il y avait un travelling déjà dans l'époque, on voyait une figure, par exemple, mid shot, et tout à coup, la figure qui avançait sur vous, jusqu'au gros plan de la tête. On avait la force parce qu'on croyait que la tête venait sur vous. Vous ne la placez pas dans l'écran, mais ça sortait de l'écran. C'est tout ce que je me rappelle.
At the University of Madrid, Bunuel had no thought of making films. In fact, he studied insects and remained fascinated by them for the rest of his life. But once his interest had been awakened in literature and art, he determined to go to Paris. In the 1920s, Paris was the artistic capital of the world. There, Bunuel found himself in a liberal and sophisticated atmosphere that made Madrid seem like a long way away. He took French lessons, he learned to dance, and he went to the cinema 3 times a day.
I loved the American comics. Their films seemed to me to have just as much poetry as Eisenstein or Murnau. But the films that influenced me most were those of Fritz Lang. When I saw The Three Lights, I suddenly knew that I too wanted to make movies. There was something about this film which touched me deeply and clarified my view of the world.
Alors j'ai dit un jour que Jean Epstein était directeur d'une académie d'acteurs. Jean Epstein, dans le moment, était très fameux en France.
Metteur en scène, oui.
Metteur en scène. Et en plus, il était un intellectuel connu en Espagne à travers l'esprit nouveau. Je le connaissais. J'avais lu des articles à lui, des poèmes et tout. Alors je me suis présenté à lui, je disais, votre élève comme acteur, pour prendre contact. Et il m'a accepté.
Et vous faisiez tout?
Je faisais tout, je faisais stagiaire, je faisais assistance. J'aidais l'opérateur, parce qu'en ce moment, l'opérateur n'avait pas d'assistant ni personne. C'est lui qui faisait tout, il chargeait les bobines. Il n'y avait pas d'assistant de caméra. Alors j'étais aussi assistant de caméra, figurant et tout.
Like Simon Stylites, perched on his pillar talking to God, I can't count the number of delectable hours I've spent in bars. I've spent long, quiet hours daydreaming, talking to myself, nodding at the waiter, watching the startling sequence of images that pass through the mind's eye. First of all, you must be quite clear about the difference between a bar and a cafe. For example, I've never been able to find a decent bar in Paris. On the other hand, without cafes, Paris is unimaginable. I remember being invited to the opening of the famous La Coupole in Montparnasse, where I met with Man Ray and Louis Aragon to plan the preview of Un Chien Andalou. The crucial point is that the cafe is synonymous with bustle, camaraderie, and women. The bar, on the other hand, is an exercise in solitude. Above all else, it must be quiet, dark, very comfortable, with no music of any kind, no matter how faint. There should be no more than a dozen tables and a clientele that doesn't like to talk. I remembered the bar at the Plaza Hotel in New York, a popular meeting place which at the time was off limits to women. Any friend of mine passing through New York knew that if he wanted to find me, he had only to go to the Plaza Bar at noon.
Ahora, ¿en qué mesa se sentaba don Luis?
Su mesa de él preferida. Siempre que llegaba él, a la 1:30, esperaba a sus amigos, se sentaba en esta mesa a tomar su martini. Y era una persona pues demasiado amable, diferente, a como decían los periódicos que era él, hosco, de mal humor, al contrario, bromista conmigo, le gustaba mucho bromearse, porque pedía a él siempre un martini del más barato, que era su frase de él: voy a tomar un martini del más barato, Córdoba. Y yo le decía, usted no se preocupe, tome del mejor que le voy a servir. Además, la casa no se lo voy a invitar, se lo va a invitar Córdoba, su servidor, y es cuando él soltaba la carcajada, esperamos, tomando su martini.
When it comes to drinks, red wine is my favorite, but it does nothing for the imagination. To provoke or sustain a reverie in a bar, you have to drink English gin, especially in the form of the dry martini. The dry martini is composed essentially of gin and a few drops of Noy Pra. Connoisseurs who like their martinis very dry maintain that it's enough merely to pass the bottle of Noy Pra through a ray of sunlight before the light hits the glass of gin. They used to have a saying in America that the perfect dry martini should resemble the Annunciation, the moment when the Virgin Mary conceived. For according to St. Thomas Aquinas, the generative power of the Holy Ghost pierced the Virgin's hymen like a ray of sunlight passes through a window without breaking it. But all this seems a trifle excessive to me. For those who are still with me, let me give you my personal recipe. Keep all the ingredients, the gin, the glasses and the shaker, chilled until ready to serve. Pour a few drops of Noy Pra over the ice and then a few drops of Angostura bitters. Stir it, then pour it away, keeping only the ice, which retains the faint taste of both. Pour straight gin over the ice, stir it again, and serve. There is a bar in the El Paular Hotel in the northern part of Madrid, set in the courtyard of a magnificent Gothic monastery, which is particularly special to me. It was there that I wrote several scripts. It's a long room, lined with tall granite columns. I can sit there for hours undisturbed, surrounded by Zurbarán reproductions, only half conscious of the shadow of a silent waiter floating by from time to time, ever respectful of my alcoholic reveries. I loved the Paular the way I loved my closest friends. At the end of a working day, my scriptwriter collaborator, Jean-Claude Carrière, would leave me there to meditate. Alone with Zurbarán, my favorite drink, and the granite columns cut from that marvelous Castilian stone, I'd let my mind wander beyond time, open to the images that happened to appear.
He used to say that the imagination was the queen. that you must obey and follow your imagination. And to train this imagination, we used to, every day when we were living together, to spend some time, you know, separate, like half an hour at the end of the afternoon before the drink. And during this half an hour, we had to imagine something, a story, short, long, funny, dramatic, no matter. And then we met in the bar and we told each other the story, which could have a connection with the script we were working on or not. You know, it didn't matter. So this cult of imagination was the base of his work. And he made a film about this, which is The Phantom of Liberty. The Phantom of Liberty was probably, you have to consider liberty as liberty of the artist, which doesn't really exist as a phantom. We believe that we are free to invent. We are not, because we obey to a lot of, dark substructures. And that's why The Phantom of Liberty is the most really surrealistic Bunuel film.
Ma chère Edith, voyez quelle heureuse rencontre. Messieurs, mademoiselle Rosenblum.
Enchantée, mademoiselle.
Très heureuse.
Edith, servez un peu de Porto, s'il vous plaît.
Monsieur de Richemont, pouvez-vous m'aider, s'il vous plaît?
Bien sûr.
Nous sommes un peu à l'étroit ici, mais tant pis. Nous adorons ces petits impromptus.
Merci infiniment, mademoiselle.
Je sens que nous allons passer un petit moment bien agréable. Enfin, si vous n'y voyez pas d'inconvénient, bien sûr.
Vous me permettez? Dites-moi, monsieur Berman, nous nous sommes jamais rencontrés?
Non, je pense pas.
Vous n'avez pas vécu au Congo?
Au Congo?
Au Congo belge.
Sans doute avez-vous entendu parler, madame, de l'histoire de Savonarole.
C'était un dominicain, n'est-ce pas?
Certes, madame, certes, et non du moindre, puisque lorsque...
Savonarole a été jugé et condamné comme hérétique. Eh bien, aujourd'hui, il est complètement réhabilité.
Mais que va devenir la magnifique basilique?
Oh, une église comme toutes les autres.
Et la Vierge de Lourdes, c'est la même chose.
Non, non, à Lisieux, il n'y a jamais eu un vrai miracle, tandis qu'à Lourdes...
Allez, frappe, vieille pute! Plus fort! Encore! Oui, comme ça! Plus fort! Oui! Je suis un porc! Je suis une ordure! Frappe! Salombière! Allez! Je suis pourri! Je suis lépreux! Encore! Attendez, non, ne partez pas! Mais que les moines restent au moins. Allez, vas-y. Encore. Oui.
Laissez-le moi, chère madame.
Oui, emmenez-le.
Et merci de votre accueil.
Il aime les coups. Je vais lui en donner.
Calmez-vous, mon père, calmez-vous. Vous allez vous reposer.
It was here, at the El Palar Monastery, that Bunuel wrote all his last great films. The Milky Way, Discreet Charm of the Bourgeoisie, and Phantom of Liberty. They were an extraordinary mixture of the fantastic, the commonplace, and the mysterious. There are countless scenes in these later films that defy any logical explanation. Bunuel's particular favourite was in The Phantom of Liberty, where the prefect of police has decided to deal with a demonstration which is mysteriously taking place at the zoo. The prefect is played simultaneously, and for no apparent reason, by two actors instead of one, Julien Berthaud and Michel Piccoli.
Bonjour Michel. Bonjour Julien. C'est moi qui viens vers moi, comme disait l'autre dans une pièce célèbre.
Je suis très content de me voir.
Oui, c'est ça, moi aussi. Il y a longtemps qu'on ne s'est vu, justement.
Oui.
Je ne t'ai pas vu, moi, depuis ce fantôme, où nous étions deux préfets ensemble,
oui,
et séparément.
Exactement.
Tu étais le préfet de police.
Et toi, tu étais le préfet de police.
Qu'est-ce que vous faites ce matin?
Ce matin, vous savez...
Ah oui, le zoo, à midi.
Je crains un peu de grabuge, mais j'ai pris mes précautions.
J'ai fait disposer 12 cars de CRS dans les avenues tout autour.
Mais pas tous ensemble. Dispersés. Les uns ici, les autres là, pour ne pas alarmer les gens. De toute façon, l'essentiel est de les empêcher d'arriver aux cages.
Les fermetures ont été soigneusement vérifiées.
Et puis après tout, si quelques animaux sont abattus, tant pis.
La vie d'un de nos hommes est plus précieuse que celle d'un zèbre.
À votre santé.
À votre santé.
Chargez. Et frappez fort.
On ne savait pas qu'après notre scène, arrivait une autruche.
Oui, c'est ça. Ça, il nous a jamais dit. Nous avons pensé de bonne foi qu'on finissait le film sur les meutes dans le jardin des plantes et qu'on était grave comme ça. On se prenait un peu au sérieux et d'un seul coup, il y avait...
Alors, cette autruche...
Ça, nous, on ne savait pas.
Cette autruche, c'est quoi? C'est pour se moquer et des deux préfets. C'était sans doute le troisième préfet.
Le troisième préfet.
Et c'était sûrement aussi la foule qui manifestait et qui ne comprenait pas du tout ce qu'avait dit le préfet.
Voilà.
C'était vraiment son film surréaliste, ça. C'était comme les films de Un Chien Andalou. C'était dans la même genre, vous croyez, ça, ces derniers
Un Chien Andalou, ça allait tout à fait à fond, n'est-ce pas? Les fourmis
mais
dans la
l'esprit
main,
surréaliste.
Oui, c'est ça. Mais Chien Andalou, c'est de 1928. Ça, c'est hier, si j'ose dire, n'est-ce pas?
It was in my house that for the first time the Chien Andalou has been shown to other people who wasn't in the production, you know. I was so surprised. I couldn't believe that such a nice man and so well-behaved could have some so terrible ideas. And it took me a long time to recover.
Tell me about Dali and Bunuel working with your husband.
At the time, my husband was a very big star, which is completely forgotten now. And they needed somebody who had a name to raise the money. They adapted what they have written or talked about with my husband at my home. And the atmosphere was high, you know. They were, I don't think they were drinking that much, no, not at the time, but they were excited. There's such excitement, you know, that I could hear they are going out and coming back and banging the doors and all that. But I was obliged to stay in my room and be quiet because they didn't like at all. I even didn't know where they were shooting on the first days. And by hazard, I saw suddenly my husband on a bicycle with all those handkerchiefs floating on his neck, and I've been very afraid at the time. I said to myself, my God, what is going to happen, you know?
premier film, c'est Un Chien Andalou.
Oui.
Comment vous l'avez écrit?
Je l'ai écrit. J'allais faire un film avec des Gomez de la Serna. Je suis le voir Dali des vacances, j'ai eu des vacances, et avec lui, on a pensé faire Un Chien Andalou à cause des rêves que nous avons eus.
Lesquels?
Un rêve de... Lui rêvait qu'il y avait la main pleine de fourmis. Il m'a raconté les rêves. Et moi, j'ai rêvé un couteau qui coupait un œil. Alors, il a dit, on pourrait faire un film avec ça, avec des éléments comme ça, irrationnels. Et nous avons écrit le scénario en 7 jours.
7 jours?
7 jours.
Quelle était la règle d'écriture?
La règle était refuser toute image qui pouvait avoir une explication rationnelle, ou des souvenirs, ou due à la culture. C'est-à-dire toute image qui nous apparaissait, et nous la trouvions impressionnante, qui nous impressionnait, on l'acceptait sans discuter.
Vous aviez un droit de veto l'un sur l'autre?
On ne l'a pas employé. Non, le veto consiste à dire je n'aime pas ça. Et l'autre disait en effet, n'est pas bien.
Ensuite, vous avez tourné le film à Paris?
J'ai tourné le film à Paris, oui.
Avec l'argent de votre famille?
De ma mère.
Et à qui l'avez-vous présenté quand le film a été fini?
J'ai fait le film sans qu'aucun de mes amis le sache. Aucun l'a vu. Alors, un jour, j'ai connu un Man Ray à la rotonde, où la coupole venait d'ouvrir. C'est ça, la coupole venait d'ouvrir. Et là, il m'a présenté à Aragon. J'étais déjà surréaliste de mentalité de cœur. Alors,
mais vous ne connaissiez pas les membres du groupe?
Non, non, personne. J'ai connu Man Ray qui m'a présenté à Aragon.
Parce qu'il faut bien préciser, vous avez fait Un Chien Andalou avant de connaître les surréalistes.
Ah oui, oui. C'est pour ça que je suis rentré au groupe. Et là, nous sommes allés sur Souline et M. Tellier a fait une séance pour Aragon et pour Man Ray. Alors ils m'ont dit, acceptez, c'est un film surréaliste. Alors, un mois après, on l'a joué.
C'est là où vous aviez des cailloux dans vos poches?
Oui, oui. C'est un film muet et j'avais mis dans un phono. J'étais derrière l'écran avec les phonos. Je mettais des tangos argentins et des tristanais alternativement. Et à la fin, j'avais mes poches pleines de cailloux. Pour si le public protestait, les jetais des cailloux. Alors là, a été un succès extraordinaire. Il y avait tout Paris était là. Les Noailles, les Tel, les Corbusier, les Picasso, enfin tout le monde. Et ça a été un succès. Alors je suis resté tout à fait épaté. Et alors j'ai jeté les cailloux
par terre, discrètement.
My entry into the surrealist group took place very naturally. I was simply admitted to the daily meetings of the Cyrano. The Cyrano was an authentic Pigalle cafe frequented by the working class, prostitutes and pimps. The daily gathering was very much like a Spanish peña. When we discussed confidential issues, we met at André Breton's studio at 42 Rue Fontaine, which was close by. All of us were supporters of a certain concept of revolution, and although the surrealists didn't consider themselves terrorists, they were constantly fighting a society they despised. Their principal weapons weren't guns, of course, it was scandal. Scandal was a potent agent of revelation, capable of exposing such social crimes as the exploitation of one man by another, colonialist imperialism, religious tyranny, in sum, all the secret and odious underpinnings of a system that had to be destroyed.
Bunuel has succeeded in one thing, leading a moral life. And that was much more important than making good films. When he met the surrealistic movement in Paris, he found his way. For the first time, he understood that it's not enough to say no to all the official and traditional morals, which was the surrealistic point. No to all the values, the old values. It's not enough. You must find a personal moral and be faithful to it. And he found it for the rest of his life.
After Chien Andalou, Bunuel was given £1 million by the Vicomte de Noailles, an enthusiastic patron of contemporary artists, whose wife, much to Bunuel's satisfaction, was descended from the Marquis de Sade. Once again he got together with Dali to write the script, but they found that the magical rapport they'd had on Chien Andalou was gone. They parted amicably, and Dali continued to offer suggestions. But fundamentally, Bunuel made the film alone. Last year, Bunuel's second film, L'Âge d'Or, was shown in public for the first time since 1930. It was shown on Channel 4. While Chien Andalou was a great success, L'Âge d'Or was a celebrated scandal. 6 days after it opened, right-wing demonstrators raided Studio 28 in Paris where it was showing. They threw ink at the screen, fired guns, broke up the theatre, and destroyed the surrealist paintings in the foyer. As a result of the violence, the chief of police withdrew the film's license for public showing. It wasn't restored until last year.
Je veux dire, c'est que je l'ai revu avec un immense plaisir et je l'ai plus apprécié cette fois que lors de sa sortie à l'époque parce que finalement j'étais beaucoup plus jeune et que beaucoup de choses m'échappaient. Mais maintenant je le revois vraiment avec un grand plaisir et je trouve ce film superbe. Voilà.
C'est la même impression que j'ai eue, que finalement, et non seulement il n'a pas vieilli, mais le côté fort qui nous avait frappé il y a un demi-siècle est encore plus fort maintenant et reste très imposant.
Le film était fait pour réveiller le conscient ou l'inconscient collectif du public, et c'était un film qui évidemment était d'une violence parfaite, et on savait qu'il provoquerait des réactions. Les machinistes, les électriciens, les techniciens en général avaient le plus grand respect pour Bunuel, qui en plus de sa qualité humaine avait une courtoisie tout espagnole, et les choses qui étaient totalement incompréhensibles par rapport à ce qui se faisait à l'époque ne provoquaient pas de surprises exceptionnelles, sauf lorsqu'il s'agissait de faire des choses qui techniquement étaient difficiles. Ça n'a l'air de rien, mais mettre une vache dans un lit n'est pas une chose simple et qui en tout cas ne se fait pas facilement. Nous avions, n'oubliez pas, travaillé au scénario depuis le premier jour et nous savions donc exactement où nous allions. Ça avait d'ailleurs une influence importante sur notre comportement en dehors du film. Je peux dire aujourd'hui que je suis un monsieur âgé et respectable, qu'à l'époque où j'étais l'assistant de Bunuel, on ne m'invitait plus dans les dîners de famille.
C'est mal vu.
J'étais très mal vu.
I'm often asked whatever happened to surrealism. It's a tough question, but sometimes I say that the movement was successful in its details and a failure in its essentials. Breton, Éloy and Aragon are among the best French writers this century. Their books have prominent positions on all library shelves. The work of Ernst, Magritte and Dali is famous, high-priced, and hangs prominently in museums. There's no doubt that surrealism was a cultural and artistic success, but these were precisely the areas of least importance to most surrealists. Our aim was not to establish a glorious place for ourselves in the annals of art and literature, but to change the world. One good look around is evidence enough of our failure. Needless to say, any other outcome was impossible. Today we see the place of surrealism in the world as infinitesimal. We were nothing, just a small group of insolent intellectuals who argued interminably in cafes and published a journal, a handful of idealists easily divided where action was concerned. And yet, my 3-year sojourn in the exalted and yes chaotic ranks of the movement changed my life.
In 1930, Bunuel was invited to Hollywood to take up a contract with MGM.
Long before I arrived, I was in love with America. I loved everything, the styles and customs, the movies, the skyscrapers, even the policemen's uniforms. I spent 5 dazzling days at the Algonquin in New York, then I took the train for Los Angeles. As we sped across the country, America seemed to me to be the most beautiful place in the world.
J'ai eu un contrat spécial pour 6 mois pour passer 1 mois dans chaque département de métro. Montage, studio, script. Et là, en arrivant, je présentais mon script à mon superviseur. Alors il m'a dit, c'est un contrat très bizarre, vous voulez commencer par où? Le studio? J'ai dit, le studio. Alors il a regardé un grand tableau où il y avait tous les stages. Il y avait 24 stages à Metro Goldwyn. Il m'a dit, allez au 22. Et j'allais là, en rentrant, on était en train de faire un gros plan à Greta Garbo. Il avait les maquillistes, il faisait des retouches dans les maquillages. Alors, moi, naturellement, je connaissais le cinéma, je me suis pas mis comme ça à la regarder. Et il avait un superviseur par là, et il l'appelait, il a fait comme ça. Alors, il est venu, il me dit, what are you doing here? Dans ce moment-là, je ne savais même pas, good morning, rien d'anglais, je ne savais rien d'anglais. Il m'a pris, il m'a mis à la porte. Je ne suis plus allé. J'allais le samedi, tout c'est mon chèque. C'est tout. C'est mon apprentissage à Hollywood.
When people ask me if I regret not having become a Hollywood director like so many other European filmmakers, I say that I don't know. Chance is a matter of one shots. It rarely gives you a second opportunity. In the course of my career, I did make 2 American movies, however. The Young One, which tried to turn the old stereotypes of the South inside out. The black man was both good and bad. Consequently, when it opened, it was attacked from all sides. No one liked it. But by that time, I was used to violent reactions. Robinson Crusoe, on the other hand, was a great success. It was the first Eastman color film made in America, and is one of which I am very fond.
Friday? You like? You know what it is? Beautiful. Beautiful present from God. Better say from the devil. No, you would not understand, Friday. Will, master, give Friday. 1, 2, 3. You take them all. Amuse yourself. If you get tired of them, throw them into the sea.
Master! Look at Friday! Beautiful coat for wool!
Take that off.
In 1972, I returned to Los Angeles for the opening of The Discreet Charm of the Bourgeoisie, which went on to win an Oscar. I received an invitation to lunch from George Cukor, whom I'd never met. He told me there would be some old friends there. The guests included William Wyler, George Stevens, Billy Wilder, Robert Wise, and Alfred Hitchcock. I'd never met Hitchcock either, but he sat down beside me, put his arm round my shoulders, and proceeded to talk non-stop about his wine cellar, his diet, and the amputated leg in Tristana. Ah, that leg, he sighed, more than once. George Stevens raised his glass to cinema, that wonderful thing that unites us all despite our differences in origin and belief. Ever suspicious of cultural solidarity, I replied, I'll drink to that, though I have my doubts.
Simone, ça ne vous a jamais tenté d'aller dans un ashram?
Les gens vont vivre.
C'est cher? Ça ne coûte rien. Là, on fait la méditation.
Mais là-bas,
Qu'est-ce que c'est que cette plaisanterie?
Pour faire croire qu'il avait assisté à ce banquet,
Mon Dieu, mais qu'est-ce que je fais ici, moi?
vous avez endormi avec un narcotique.
Je ne connais pas le texte.
Bunuel wasn't always such a conspicuous success. Even his initial fame as a surrealist was short-lived. In 1933, 3 years after L'Âge d'Or, he made Land Without Bread, a documentary about a primitive area of Spain where the people were so backward they didn't even know how to make bread. This was the last film Bunuel was to direct for 13 years. Its bleak sights didn't suit the optimistic ideas of a new Republican government, and it wasn't shown for 4 years. Meanwhile, Bunuel was forced to find work as a producer of commercial films in the studios of Madrid. In 2 years, Bunuel produced no less than 18 films in Madrid. straightforward melodrama and light comedies. They were made against a background of increasing political turmoil, which finally led to the Spanish Civil War. In 1938, he was sent to work in Paris on the Republican government's behalf, and then a year later, shortly before the end of the war, he was told to go to America to advise on films being made about Spain. He took with him his young son, Juan Luis, and his wife, Jeanne. He married her in 1934, and he was with her for the rest of his life.
In the 1920s, while I was at the university in Madrid, there was a strange suicide that fascinated me for years. A student and his young fiancée killed themselves in a restaurant garden. They were known to be passionately in love. In fact, they were making wedding plans at the time of their deaths. So why the double suicide? I still don't have the answer. Except, perhaps, that a truly passionate love, a sublime love that's reached a certain peak of intensity, is simply incompatible with life itself. Perhaps it can exist only in death.
El amor es una ceremonia secreta para ser celebrada en el fondo subterráneo. Eso me parece maravilloso. A mí me parece el erotismo sublime y magnífico, pero tiene que estar en segunda instancia. Hay que darle el puente para pasar al amor carnalla. Pero la visión directa me repugna, por ejemplo, un beso. Me repugnan mucho los besos en la pantalla. Ese beso apasionado que muchos galanes de jóvenes presumen de besar bien, me repugna a muerte. Ahora, si mañana pudiera inventar, nunca se hubieran besado en una pantalla, y yo pudiera inventar el beso, me parece maravilloso, maravilloso. Yo sé que de mis películas se han dicho muchas cosas de las cuales soy inocente, no soy inocente porque las he hecho yo, pero yo he obrado mucho racionalmente.
No, pero yo me refería
por apariciones instantáneas de cosas que me atraen, que critico, que moralmente parecen malas o buenas, pero como me han gustado y no pertenezco a ningún bando, ni religioso ni político, pues las pongo, ¿verdad? Porque me parecen bien. Le parecen mal a mucha gente, lo acepto. A otros les parecen bien, muy bien. No he empleado nunca sistemáticamente el erotismo, ni la subversión, ni nada. Soy así y lo he hecho.
In 1966, Bunuel made his most commercially successful film, Belle de Jour, the story of a young bourgeois housewife given to sadomasochistic fantasies who secretly spends her afternoons working in a brothel.
Oy, xamay baktım ben. Qo'sim muqring, muqir. Oy. Em ko'rkim ko'm badmi cham. Qalayn xonqiga. Hayatan chamak sandaga ro'qin janobi. Sha'a chamak cha muqrig dolagat. Achi bayjana chi. Oqchiqnam bi chamak. Oqchiqnam chamak. Oqchiqnam.
What did you feel his attitude was to women generally?
Very conservative. I think he liked very much women. I think he loved his wife, of course. I think he liked very much women, but I mean, I think from a man of his kind and his age, and I think a woman has to be home. You know, he's that kind of conservative person. A woman has to be home, raise children. She's considered well, but she's a wife and a mother. I wouldn't say he's tender with women, but I think he has quite respect, you know, for women. Although he thinks, you know, they have to stay there and be there and be home. But I think he finds, you know, men, especially with their social relations, because I don't know, there are many scenes in cafes, you know, and you see men talking together, And when you see men talking together, you know, some directors in film show women talking together, and it's women talking, and you say, well, I mean, it's not possible they spend their life, you know, talking and chatting like that. He's much harder on men, because men have always that attitude of being strong and serious, and so they're much more ridiculous, because there is always a social ambition behind a man that he always showed, that he wouldn't show in a woman, you know. His attitude to women is more tender. When you see women talking together or their scenes, you can feel there are women having real problems or they're really in trouble. But men, they are like little, I don't know how you say, not, les petits coqs, comment on dit, le hen, les petits, little chickens, you know, yes. They try to always, you know, look more than what they are.
Viens dans mes bras. N'aie pas peur. Oh, ma Conchita. Tu m'as fait attendre longtemps. Mais maintenant...
Ne chante pas Victoire trop tôt.
Oh, ta peau est douce. Et ton ventre... Mais qu'est-ce que c'est que ça?
Quoi?
Ce que je sens là. Qu'est-ce que tu portes? Enlève ça.
Non.
Je vais te l'arracher, moi, tu vas voir.
Laisse-moi, tu n'y arriveras pas.
Nom de Dieu. Mais qu'est-ce que c'est que ça?
Oh, laisse-moi.
Je me suis acharné pendant 10 minutes, je me suis battu. Il y avait tant de nœuds, tant de lacets. Et Conchita qui résistait, rien à faire. Impossible d'arracher cette chose.
Isabelle, retourne jouer dans le couloir avec le petit garçon.
Mais maman, je vais écouter.
Non, va jouer. Va? Non, non.
Mais je crois que j'étais très correct. Il n'y avait rien dans ma description susceptible.
Non, bien sûr. Mais les enfants aujourd'hui, vous savez...
Mais continuez, je vous en prie.
Oui.
Tu sais, Mathieu, ce que je fais, moi non plus, je ne l'aime pas. Et toi, ce que tu aimes, c'est ce que je te refuse. Ce n'est pas moi. Il faut que tu attendes, c'est tout. Ça viendra, petit à petit. Tu sais que je suis à toi, et à toi seul, alors qu'est-ce que tu veux de plus? Dis, tu veux que je vienne habiter chez toi?
No sooner had Bunuel arrived in America to advise on films about the Spanish Civil War than he found himself out of a job. He was just about to start work when a directive came from Washington forbidding the making of any film about the war at all. So Bunuel found himself with no work, no money, and a young family to support.
I was about to try and find work in the kitchens of a big hotel when I ran into an old friend of mine named Iris Barry. She was married to the vice president of the Museum of Modern Art, and she managed to get me a job there. I was to work on anti-Nazi propaganda films for a committee run by Nelson Rockefeller. They'd smuggled in a copy of Leni Riefenstahl's Triumph of the Will, and I was to edit it down. The abridged version was shown widely to senators and consulates to demonstrate just how powerful a propaganda movie could be. Ideologically, of course, the film was horrific, but technically it was incredibly impressive. René Clair and Charlie Chaplin both rushed to see it and had totally different reactions. "Never show it," said Clair. "If you do, we're lost." Chaplin, on the other hand, laughed, once so hard that he actually fell off his chair. At the time, Dali was in New York as well. In his book, The Secret Life of Salvador Dali, he described me as an atheist, an accusation which was then even worse than being called a communist. Unknown to me, this had prompted a man named Prendergast, who was part of the Catholic lobby in Washington, to use his influence with government officials to try and get me fired.
Il était convoqué devant la direction de ce musée et on lui demandait, monsieur, est-ce que c'est vrai que le deuxième film que vous avez tourné avec Salvador Dali a été conçu par vous deux d'une façon telle qu'il en résulta un film catholique, orthodoxe, et vous avez profité de l'absence de Dali aux prises de vue pour en faire un film athée et blasphématoire. Alors, dans ces conditions, on lui a dit, nous sommes bien obligés de vous demander de démissionner. Ce qu'il a fait. Donc, il était sur le pavé. Quelques jours plus tard, m'a-t-il raconté, il a rencontré Dali sur les trottoirs de la 5e avenue. Il s'est dirigé vers lui, il lui a demandé, c'est vous, monsieur Dali? Dali lui tendait la main, qu'il n'a pas prise, qu'il n'a pas serrée. Et alors, il lui a flanqué une gifle. Et Dali s'est roulé par terre sur les trottoirs de la 5e avenue. Et c'était ça, la fin de cette amitié.
One second.
Despite all the wonderful memories of our youth and the admiration I still feel for much of his work, when I think about Dali, I can't forgive him for his egomania, his obsessive exhibitionism, his cynical support of Franco, and his disrespect for friendship. I remember saying a few years ago during an interview that I'd nevertheless like to drink a glass of champagne with him before I died. When he read the article, he said, "Me too, but I don't drink anymore."
Restez.
And now, my interest is only about the tremendous progress of nuclear research and nuclear physics.
And so really that represented a phase in your career, those jokes that we all knew about, and now you move on and all your life will be to the rhythm of atomic explosion.
Exactly, one new kind of atomic and nuclear mysticism.
Well, thank you very much. That's a fascinating phrase, nuclear mysticism.
In 1946, out of work again, Bunuel was offered the chance to direct in Mexico. He went there with his family and stayed for the rest of his life. He was to make 20 films in Mexico, including Exterminating Angel, Nazarin, and Los Olvidados. In 1950, Bunuel was a name of the past in Europe. He was even thought to be dead. Then, when Los Olvidados won the first prize at Cannes, it was as if he'd risen from the ashes.
Senor Bunuel, when you made L'Âge d'Or in the 30s in Paris, must have been a very exciting time then, the surrealist time. I suppose it's one of the most savage, antisocial films that have ever been made. Have you changed your ideas radically about society and religion since that time?
I believe exactly the same that at that epoch, exactly. But now, I am old and I am more quiet, more tranquil, and that's the reason. But I always think the same. I have no change in my mind about it.
What I am trying to communicate, he said, is constantly, every day, relentlessly, to the audience that we are not living in the best of all possible worlds. There was a film he hated particularly, De Sica's film, Miracle in Milano, where the rich parade about in top hats with cigars and the poor are all wonderful. He said, then what is the reason to strive to come out of poverty? Is to live in poverty is to be so nice, so good, so cherished by the Lord. This was a typically Christian attitude towards poverty that he despised. He said, the social order corrupts us all, rich and poor alike. The rich can defend themselves against corruption more than the poor. It is in the poor that one sees the poison of the social system. And he saw it in Los Olvidados, With great candor he saw it, with great innocence, with no Manichaeanism. The blind man, the kids in the slums, they are terrible, they are terrifying.
Y olvídame después, mas si el dolor hacia tus puertas llega y se anida en tu pecho un cruel sufrir.
¿Qué? ¿Te pegó fuerte? Siéntate. Sí, pero de razón. A ver. Ven.
Oye, pelón, el piquete de clavo es malo, se te puede enconar. Ponte una telaraña, son buenas para las hemorragias de sangre. Pedro, tráigala.
Piedad, piedad para un pobre ciego indefenso.
¡Órale, viejo, poca luz! ¡Don! ¡Ahora verá! ¡Órale! ¡Este perro, no! ¡Órale, verá! ¡Órale, órale! ¡A la cabeza, pelón! ¡A la cabeza! ¡A la cabeza, pelón! ¡Órale! ¡El más pedo, nunca! ¡Perro, ya ¡abusado! ¡No se vaya usted a caer!
There is still remains something about my cruelty, but I go towards the tenderness. It doesn't mean that this tenderness is to accept the reality or the society. One can be tender in the cruelty you want, or you can be against the society and be very tender. It's not in contraposition, one thing. Then I think I am going more and more toward the tenderness and the...
Therefore you have changed from last year.
Perhaps, yes, perhaps. I am the same, but now I think I add something that it was forbidden to myself at that time.
At the end of the Civil War, many Spaniards, including some of my closest friends, sought refuge in Mexico. The expatriates came from all classes, laborers, writers, even scientists, but all seemed to adapt to their new country with relative ease. One of the most dramatic aspects of Latin American culture is that human life, one's own as well as other people's, seems less important than it is elsewhere. One can be killed for the slightest mistake, like a sideways look, or simply because someone feels like it. European readers are always shocked when they see their morning paper in Mexico, which is typically filled with reports of all sorts of violent crimes. However, homicide in Mexico usually involves only a pistol shot. It rarely includes all the macabre details that often accompany murder in Western Europe or the United States.
I don't know if Mexico gave him something special. I don't think he was pretending to do especially a film about jealousy in Mexico when he did El, or about the more ridiculous aspects of the Mexican upper classes when he did The Exterminating Angel. This was not his purpose. He was a mythographer, and he thought in universal terms. It so happens that he was using Mexican decor, Mexican actors, and therefore, indirectly, he gives us a devastating picture of the upper classes in Mexico and, in fact, in Latin America.
Buenos días, Rita. ¿Ha dormido usted bien?
No me lo va a creer, pero no me he despertado ni un instante. En cambio yo, qué noche. Ni siquiera cuando el descarrilamiento del expreso de Niza me he sentido tan adolorida.
¿Pero usted ha descarrilado alguna vez? ¡Qué interesante! Si te vieras en el espejo. No sé qué decirte. Por el momento habrá que ofrecerles el desayuno. Después de seguro se irán a sus casas.
Por supuesto. Confío en su discreción.
Yo iba enloquecida de un lado a otro. Un vagón de tercera repleto de gente del pueblo se había aplastado como un enorme acordeón. Y dentro, ¡qué carnicería! Debo ser insensible porque no me conmovió el dolor de aquellos infelices.
Tengo hambre. ¿Insensible y se desmayó usted al desfilar ante el cuerpo yacente del príncipe Lurca?
Oh, no compare usted. ¿Cómo podía quedar nadie indiferente ante la grandeza y la muerte de aquel admirable príncipe que fue nuestro amigo? Y aquel nobilísimo perfil.
¿En esta casa no se desayuna?
Yo creo que la gente del pueblo, la gente baja, es menos sensible al dolor. ¿Usted ha visto un toro herido alguna vez? Impasible.
Otro elemento en tus películas, Luis.
Sí.
Los animales.
Yo adoro los animales. Está a nuestra disposición, los pobrecitos, contra... Eso fue un defecto de Cristo que se lo critican mucho en mis oraciones. Se le critica mucho.
¿Don Luis?
Digo, señor, qué lástima que tú no prohibieses a tus cristianos sacrificar animales, porque comen vegetales. O sea, la dentadura y el estómago, respetemos a estos pobres bichos que los degollamos por millones, los hacemos sufrir para que el hombre no tenga cáncer. Sacrifican 5.000 perros, 50 millones de perros diarios.
Y los conejos en condominio.
Horrible, horrible. Criminal. Yo al hombre estimo más a los animales que al hombre. No, mis amigos, amigos de amigos de amigos, pero el hombre en general, por ser hombre, no me merece respeto. Es culpable, el hombre es culpable de algo. Usted respeta por ejemplo, a un nazi criminal, a un Hitler, yo no lo respeto, aprieto el botón y lo mato.
The surrealists used to make very clear distinctions between good and evil, the beautiful and the ugly. So inspired by these old games, I've decided to engage in the healthy exercise of listing some of my passions and my bête noire. I love Fabre's Book of Insects. I used to say that this was the only book I'd take with me if I were exiled to a desert island, although today I've changed my mind and wouldn't take any book at all. I have a lifelong love of firearms, most of which I sold in 1964, the year I was convinced I was going to die. I practiced shooting in all sorts of places, including my office, where I fire at a metal box on a bookshelf opposite my desk. I confess to mixed emotions when it comes to spiders. All my brothers and sisters can talk about them for hours in the most meticulous and horrifying detail. It seems we're all equally fascinated and revolted. Apart from the portrait Dali painted of me when we were young, I won't keep any pictures on the wall in case spiders lurk behind them. Like most deaf people, I don't much like the blind. Whenever I think of blind men, I can't help remembering the words of Benjamin Perret, who was very concerned about whether mortadella sausage was made by the blind. Of course, some might find that relationship somewhat absurd, but for me, it's the quintessential example of surrealist thought. I adored Wagner, whose music I used in several films, from Chien Andalou to That Obscure Object of Desire. I'd consider my old age redeemed if my hearing were to come back. I suppose the only chance I have of that kind of miracle involves nothing short of a visit to Lourdes. As children, we had strange pets. At one time or another, we had monkeys, parakeets, falcons, frogs, toads, and even snakes, of which I'm still very fond. Vivisection horrifies me, of course. Sometimes you just have to say shit to science. I like secret passageways, bookshelves that open onto silence, staircases that go down into the void, and hidden safes. I even have one myself, but I won't tell you where. I began to smoke when I was 16 and have never stopped. Tobacco is a fond companion for all occasions, a loyal friend through fair weather and foul. People smoke to celebrate a happy moment or to hide a bitter regret. What lovelier sight is there than that double row of white cigarettes lined up like soldiers on parade and wrapped in silver paper? I love the feel of the cigarette between my fingers, the paper on my lips, the taste of tobacco on my tongue. I've always liked to watch the way women walk. Jeanne Moreau has an incredible way of walking. Her foot trembles just a bit on its high heel, suggesting a certain tension and instability.
Allez, allez, que je les vois remuer un peu, ces petites bottines.
Jeanne is a marvelous actress, and I kept my direction to a minimum.
Montrez-moi la semelle. Oh, elle est un peu trouée, n'est-ce pas? Eh bien, je vous les réparerai. Elles seront comme neuves. Là, c'est bien, Marie. Là. Maintenant, asseyez-vous, Marie, venez. Asseyez-vous. Maintenant, vous allez me les donner, vos petites bottines. Tout de suite. Je vous les prends, vous voyez? Et je vais les emporter avec moi. Les chères petites bottines.
Everything was simple with Don Luis. No rush, no big hectic moments of anxiety. He spoke very little, explained very little, but very attached to all the details, the small objects, details of the costume, of the hair, makeup, and very, very fascinated by the breast. He thought my breast was too small. And he dared not speak to me directly. So after a very complicated conversation, I was asked to wear a bra with a little pad so my breast would be more the way he likes it, you know. And though he didn't say anything, you could feel how he wanted to pin down that awkward quality of all the characters. Seeking for the unknown. Seeking for what you cannot explain by words.
Louis, si vous aviez un conseil à donner à un jeune cinéaste aujourd'hui, qu'est-ce que vous lui diriez?
Du point de vue technique, je ne peux pas donner de conseils. Chacun a sa technique spéciale. Je lui donnerais plutôt un conseil de type moral, soi-disant. C'est-à-dire de ne jamais faire aucun film peut-être bon, médiocre ou mauvais, mais il ne doit jamais être fait contre la conscience et les pensées et l'idéologie de l'auteur. Donc je lui conseillerais, même s'il crève de faim, de ne rien faire qui puisse aller contre sa conscience ou ses idées.
Enelina, ¿qué quieres? ¿Sí? Sí. Enelina nos va a sacar un retrato a todos como recuerdo.
¿Y con qué máquina?
Con una que me regalaron mis papás. Con él se ha hecho la cosa. ¿Qué es lo que vas a hacer? Yo te empujaron.
In 1960, Bunuel returned to Spain to make Viridiana. It contains one of his most famous scenes, the parody of the Last Supper.
Tu refugio, recógete esa greña, mujer, que no se te ve la cara. Adivina, adivinanza. ¿Cuál es la de que pone la granza? La gallina. ¡Vamos, estaros quietos! Tú no te muevas.
Among my friends in Mexico City is Father Julian Pablo, a modern Dominican, a painter and engraver. He and I often talk about faith and the existence of God. but he's forever coming up against the stone wall of my atheism.
Yo la primera vez que vi Viridiana, sí choquea, ¿no? Causa la repetición de la última cena, pues es una escena chocante, ¿no? Fuerte, ¿no? Y aún actualmente para mucha gente, don Luis, dentro de la Iglesia Católica, es un ser prohibido todavía, ¿no? Para mí no, para mí al contrario, como él mismo lo dice en el libro respecto de mí, él me ayudó a profundizar más seriamente en mi fe, ¿no? Como le ayudó a mucha gente, creo. A todos los dominicos de aquí le tenemos un infinito respeto, ¿no? Como unos de los seres más excepcionales que hemos conocido, más respetuosos con la religión que hemos conocido, que no contradice su cine. Él en su cine no es blasfemo, él plantea dentro de su surrealismo las cosas como las ve y como las siente, ¿no?
Deus irredebit ladrones. Y Dios se reirá de los ladrones, dicen los santos evangelios. Amados hermanos, es el dedo de Dios. En esto se ve claramente la voluntad del Altísimo. No por casualidad se ha producido el hurto en un lugar donde tienen asiento el vicio, la maledicencia y el ocio. El ladrón, a la vez que cometía un acto reprobable a los ojos de Dios, estaba actuando guiado por Satanás contra el propio Satanás. Esa es la paradoja divina, hermanos. El pecado castigando al pecado. Una manzana podrida que es sacada del cesto de las manzanas buenas por una mano pecadora. Extraños caminos escoge la justicia del Señor. Y ahora, hijos míos, vamos a rezar por el alma del pecador.
In 1965, a friend persuaded Bunuel to appear in a film. He agreed, but only if he could play a policeman or a priest.
Bunuel is a man who was full of many contradictions and who lived perfectly well with his own contradiction. For instance, he was an atheist, clearly. In the same time, he could not imagine a story out of the Catholic atmosphere. He was a real Spanish person, I mean, with real Spanish roots. At the same time, a totally international artist. He was a surrealist, a revolutionary, completely when he was young, and also when he was old. In the same time, he led a very bourgeois life.
Bunuel used to come here because it's a quiet and calm place. And he wrote here, as you know, The Discreet Charm of the Bourgeoisie and Fantôme de la Liberté. He came here as a tradition. He likes the cloisters, the mystery of the cloister. He likes the cold weather, and here is very cold. He used to walk early in the morning and have a drink here in this bar. Someone wrote that I was in his films his alter ego. But you make me difficult questions, you see, and to explain Bunuel is very difficult. So I think I will answer you in Spanish. En los últimos films hay algo en todos los personajes autobiográfico. Y uno de los personajes que se parecen más a Buñuel es Don Lope, en Tristana. En aquel film fue un poco como un testamento. En aquella película es un poco triste, es un poco... Entonces, Había en el personaje de Don Lope quizá algunas de las reacciones que él podía tener como un personaje de la época. Sin embargo, en el desarrollo del escenario, Don Lope iba cada vez transformándose más, de acuerdo con la novela, en un personaje más caduco, que abdicaba de sus ilusiones. Al principio es liberal, es anticlerical, es partidario del amor libre, desprecia una serie de convenciones de la sociedad, y poco a poco este hombre se va transformando en un viejo partidario de casarse por la iglesia, es amigo de la policía, etcétera, etcétera. Y esto va haciendo que Buñuel odie un poco el personaje y al final he kills him. ¿Sí? Eso no está en la novela. En the book, Don Lope is with Tristana till the end, you know. But he killed Don Lope because he told me many times that he was afraid to become an old man with arteriosclerotic, you see. So that's why he reacted against Don Lope, and he killed Don Lope in a very cruel manner, see.
¿Qué pasa? ¿Te sientes mal? ¿Te cayó mal la cena? ¿Quieres una taza de tila?
No, Tristana. Esto es algo más serio. Siento un dolor aquí que me mata. Llama al médico. Pronto.
Pero, ¿tan mal te sientes de veras?
Ay, llama al médico.
Deme el 240. Soy yo. ¿Doctor Mikis? Oiga, está sufriendo mucho. Muy bien. Venga cuanto antes. Lope. 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 El doctor Mikis llegará enseguida. ¿No me oyes, Lope? ¿No me oyes?
Celoso. Tú me has dicho que si en el futuro... La pregunta tuya es totalmente honesta.
Yo tengo dos maneras de escandalizar al mundo. Una, yo que soy ateo fiel, gracias a Dios soy desde que nací ateo, pues me gustaría mucho, al morir, le he dicho eso, digo a Julio, que esté de muerte. Y llamo a mis amigos y ya me dicen, bueno, va a vivir 5 horas. Si está aún con conciencia de mí mismo, llamo a un sacerdote. El padre Julián no, porque es muy a un sacerdote mucho más severo que él. Viene a confesarme. Me confieso todo en voz alta y llamo a mis amigos ateos, comunistas y tal. Están allá presentes. Me acuso de tal, creo en ti, Dios mío. Tomen ejemplo de mi muerte. Ustedes han compartido conmigo creencias nefastas. Miren cómo muero. y muero y voy al infierno porque es toda una broma que les hago a mis amigos.
No, sin broma. Oye,
O sea que esto es para burlarme de mis amigos. Ahora, bueno,
Luis.
otra cosa luego, testamento. Antes de morir, ese testamento. Muero yo y al día siguiente, o a los 10 días, el notario llama a mis 2 hijos y están para mi testamento. Mi inmensa fortuna está ya en el testamento. Entonces, el notario los convoca y está citados doña Juana Bunuel, don José Luis, total. Pues no podemos empezar falsando. El señor Nelson Rockefeller, que ha dicho que vendría ahora a las 12, son las 12 y llega Nelson. Entonces, porque esperaba Nelson Rockefeller, se abre el testamento. Le digo toda mi fortuna a don Nelson Rockefeller y dejo a mi mujer y a los hijos en la calle. O sea, me muero, escupen en mi cadáver todos mis amigos, mi mujer, mis hijos, todo el mundo.
Oye, Luis.
Una manera fea, buena de despreciar la humanidad, ¿no? Muero escupido por todos mis amigos.
Oye, Luis, ¿me permite que dude de la butad que estás diciendo y que crea que en el fondo hay algo que no es lo que dices?
Bueno.
Está bien, nada más.
No lo haré, pero mi idea, y sigo hoy mi antiguo maestro, el Marqués de Sá, que al morirme yo me gusta mis cenizas, las tiro al viento y la gente se olvida de mi nombre y de...